Battle over redistricting. Texas is on the verge of giving Republicans 5 additional congressional seats. Ahead of next year's midterms, Republicans passed that legislation that redraws the state's congressional maps in favor of the GOP. They passed that in the overnight hours last night, and now it heads to Governor Greg Abbott's desk for his signature. CNN correspondent Arlette Saenz is in Austin, Texas, with the latest on this. Arlette?
The Texas Senate gave its final stamp of approval on a redistricting bill that could reshape the landscape for the 2026 midterm elections. The bill passed the state Senate in the early morning hours of Saturday, and now will head to Texas Governor Greg Abbott for his signature. He's expected to sign it early next week. But really, this represents a major victory for President Trump and the Republican Party, as they are trying to pick up an additional 5 U.S. House seats here in Texas. And Republicans have been very blunt about why they are pushing these redistricting plans. Take a listen to State Senator Phil King, a Republican on the Senate floor.
I'm convinced that if Texas does not take this action, that there is an extreme risk that Republican majority will be lost. And if it does, the next 2 years after the midterms, they will be nothing but inquisitions and impeachments and humiliation for our country.
Texas Democrats who had fled the state to try to block this bill for 2 weeks had no other legislative options left to prevent this from being passed. Now Democrats are turning their attention to the courts, hoping that the court system will step in to block these maps from going into effect. But already this map, even before it was passed and signed into law, it's already impacting the 2026 midterms here in Texas. There's Congressman Lloyd Doggett, who represents a district right here in Austin. He announced that he would not seek re-election if the courts do not block these maps. That part of that is because a congressman from a district just south of here, Greg Casar, said that he would now run in Doggett's district after his own district is essentially eliminated to become a more GOP-leaning district. So there's a lot of big questions going forward for Democrats about how they are going to handle this, whether they will continue to seek a re-election in their districts or perhaps decide to retire. But at this moment, this really represents a major victory for President Donald Trump, who has also vowed to push other states to consider their own redistricting options as well. Arlette Saenz, CNN, Austin, Texas.
Arlette, thank you. And let's bring in CNN senior political analyst and opinion columnist for Bloomberg, Ron Brownstein. Ron, good to see you on this Saturday evening and afternoon. Earlier this week, we saw Democrats here in California passing their own redistricting plan. And they're going to try to take this to the voters and get them to sign on for this. Now that both parties are kind of taking this approach of redrawing in the middle of what normally is a 10-year span, is there any reining this in? Is this just the new normal?
Well, there's a clear cause and effect here, right? I mean, it was President Trump who precipitated this cycle by really demanding that Texas Republicans undertake a mid-decade redistricting, which they've done before in Texas, but has rarely been done elsewhere. I mean, this is really supposed to be a decennial, once-a-decade process, and I don't think we have seen the last of it, Jessica. I mean, the president, is pressuring Missouri, Indiana, Ohio, Florida, Republican states. Democrats probably can't keep up with all of those states. There may be further seats that they can squeeze out here and there, Illinois and Maryland, maybe more for 2028. But this is a really ominous moment, I think. And if you listen to that language of the Texas senator that Arlette was quoting, he basically said that because Democrats are a Democratic majority is such a threat to the country, to President Trump, that essentially any means necessary are justified to prevent it. And that is what students of democratic backsliding and authoritarianism have labeled constitutional hardball. And it is a marker of nations that are whose democratic principles are eroding.
You also recently wrote about California's Governor Gavin Newsom and his specific approach to fighting back against President Trump. Explain to people how you described him, how you categorized him, and if you think that that's going to be the way forward.
Yeah, I think it is very significant what he is doing, whether he is the ultimate beneficiary of it or not, because he is directly challenging the assumption in a lot of the Democratic Party that the only way to effectively push back on Trump is to also move to the left. Newsom is doing something very different. He has clearly moved himself to the front of the line among Democratic officials who have found ways to consistently and forcefully resist what Trump is doing. I mean, he is the only governor who has acted at this point of a blue state. California has also sued the administration over 35 times. He has given speeches about Trump's moves that are consolidating power. So he has certainly established himself as a leader in pushing back on Trump. But at the same time, he is moderating his position on a lot of issues that have hurt Democrats in recent elections. Some of the transgender issues relating to homelessness, environmental reviews of new construction, even freezing the ability of undocumented migrants to get into the state's Medicaid program. I think if you add both of these things together, it produces what I called confrontational centrism. And I do think that whether Newsom is ultimately the one who benefits from that or not, it's going to be a very attractive formula for Democrats, because the confrontation allows you to get through the primary without checking a lot of the litmus test boxes that might hurt you in a general election. One last point. Whether or not he's the ultimate beneficiary, he has clearly caught the attention of Democratic voters nationwide. There have been a number of polls of Democrats, early polls, about 28, and he has far outpaced some of the other governors who might be running. So Democrats, I think, are taking a look.
Yeah, you have to think his name ID certainly is quite high compared to other governors as well. Lastly, before we let you go, I do want to also touch on President Trump deploying National Guard troops and federal agents into Washington, D.C. He says this is to crack down on crime. He also says that Chicago and New York could be next. How do you think Americans are going to respond as this continues?
Yeah, look, I've been writing about this for years. I mean, Trump is not a person who often admits publicly to regrets. I mean, it's kind of a my way presidency. But he said frequently after leaving office in 2020 that one of his regrets about his first term was that he did not send the National Guard into more blue cities over the objections of Democratic governors and mayors. And in that 24 campaign, he explicitly said repeatedly that he wanted to deploy federal military force into blue city for multiple purposes: participating in mass deportation, fighting crime, clearing the homeless. He is now moving down that checklist. And even at that first deployment in LA, I think it was pretty clear that the goal went beyond defending federal buildings or even participating in ICE raids. It was to numb Americans to the sight of heavily armored troops in the streets of Democratic-run cities. That's an image that is foreign to American history, except at the worst moments of civil disorder, and is much more common in authoritarian countries. And I think there is no question that he is going to look for legal pretext to do this in more places, whether it's Chicago or New York or beyond. It is a fundamental challenge to the way we have understood the use of the military. The arguments he was making, Jessica, in court over the California deployment essentially argued that the Posse Comitatus Act essentially had no limits on what they could do. So I think we are going to be seeing more of this. And I don't think, outside of Newsom and a few others, Democrats have really been loud enough in calling attention to what a radical break this is from the way the military has operated throughout all of our history.